We were all sitting down for dinner when my son-in-law leaned way back in his chair, a smug grin plastered on his face. He held up his wine glass and asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, "What's it like being a nobody, Walter?" The table just blew up with laughter. Everybody, that is, except for me. I just stared at him, didn't even flinch. I kept a smile on my face and told him, "How's it feel knowing this nobody is about to stop paying all your bills?" I made sure to add, "starting tomorrow." His face just went white. My daughter, Helena, froze with her hand reaching for the bread basket. The cozy feeling in the room just vanished, replaced by this cold, tense quiet that felt like it was squeezing the air out of everyone's lungs. And that's when the whole game changed. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The big lamp hanging over us hummed a quiet electric sound, like it had just realized how heavy it was. Forks stopped in midair. Wine glasses trembled just a little bit in people's hands. I could see my own reflection in the side of the wine bottle, a distorted image of a seasoned guy, not angry, just done. Sebastian cleared his throat and tried to bring things back to normal with a laugh that didn't stick. "You're joking, right?" he said, his voice a little shaky. "It was just a gag, Walter." "Well, now it's not," I replied. "Let's call mine the punchline." Helena swallowed hard. Her silver bracelet, the one with that tiny catch she's always got trouble with, caught the light and blinked like a signal no one wanted to answer. "Dad, please not here," she whispered, like she was afraid of waking up something dangerous. Across from me, my grandson Klaus was just watching. He wasn't blinking either. He's about 13 now, and he's learning the rules of being a man by watching how the old ones break them. My granddaughter, Freya, had her napkin in her lap like a surrendered flag. Under the table, their old Labrador stretched out and let out a sigh that sounded almost human. Sebastian picked up his glass and then set it back down without taking a sip. His face went from flushed to pale as a ghost. "Walter," he tried again, using my name in a way that sounded more polite than he felt. "If you've got a problem with how we—" "I don't have a problem," I said, nice and calm. "I have a ledger and a decision." He let out a short, relieved laugh. "You mean like some sort of intervention?" he asked. "Because if this is about the BMW, it's about all 30 days in every month," I cut in, "and the 16 years of them that came before." Helena put her fork down and clasped her hands together like she was praying, her thumbs rubbing against each other. "We can talk about this later," she said, glancing at the children. "The children have ears," I said softly, "and I'm not going to lie to them." Then I turned to them because it felt like the right thing to do. "Freya, that ballet recital was beautiful," I said. "Klaus, that three-pointer you told me about? I'm still proud of you." Klaus just nodded, like he wasn't sure if he was even allowed to agree with me. Freya gave a half smile, and then it faded away. Sebastian slid his chair back an inch from the table, just enough to show a line he hadn't earned. "So that's it," he said. "You're going to make a scene at our dinner?" "This isn't about embarrassment," I said. "It's about math, respect, and stopping a bad habit before it eats you from the inside out." I could pull that habit out like a string. It all started in February of 2011, the month after my wife, Eleanor, passed away. Helena called from the laundry room to say they were a little short on the mortgage. Just this one time. That line, "just this one time," was burned into my memory. It always shows up with friends. Helena stood up and started collecting plates that didn't need to be collected. Her voice wavered, but it didn't break. "Kids, can you please take your food into the living room and watch something? I'll bring dessert in a little while." The kids went without a fuss, the way children do when they've learned that doing what they're told is safer than asking questions. The dog followed them, its claws clicking on the hardwood floor. Once their footsteps faded, Helena let out a breath like she'd been holding the world in her chest. "Dad, just tell me what's going on," she said. "Please don't do this like it's a show." "It's not a show," I said. "It's a boundary." Sebastian's jaw clenched. "You could have just said no all these years. No one forced you." "You're right," I told him. "No one did." I said yes for reasons I'm not ashamed of. But those reasons don't mean I have to keep doing it forever. I looked at Helena. Sweetheart, I promised your mom I'd take care of you. Not that I'd bankroll your lifestyle. Lifestyle? Sebastian scoffed, the word sounding ugly in his mouth. You act like like you're living beyond your means. I finished for him. I don't need to act. I have the records to prove it. He snorted, but his eyes didn't show it. There it is, Mr. Engineer and his files. I thought of the metal cabinets in my study. Each drawer was a quiet reminder that memories are easier to deal with when they're organized. Yeah, I said, Mr. Engineer and his files. Helena rubbed her temples. Dad, we are trying. The words sounded practiced and worn out. The job market, the economy. Regional Operations Manager, I said to Sebastian. That's a real title. Congratulations. Comes with a paycheck. So does letting go of certain things. And what exactly are you suggesting we let go of? Sebastian asked, raising an eyebrow like he was genuinely curious, which he wasn't. The mortgage, the kids' school, groceries. Your car, I said. The bar tabs where the story about me changes depending on who's listening. The idea that I'll fill in every blank. The thought that your wants and your needs are the same. His mouth snapped shut. The wine in his glass stopped moving. Helena stared at the tablecloth like it might give her some lines to say. Dad, she said again, and this time her voice had that cold, salty smell of the first winter after Eleanor died. Please don't leave Mad. I pushed my chair back slowly, so the legs wouldn't scrape the floor. I'm not mad, I said, and I meant it. Anger had burned itself out a long time ago, like fog on a sunny day. I'm just clear. I kissed her cheek. Tasted like rosemary and worry. Thanks for dinner. Sebastian stood up when I did, as if being on his feet would make him taller. Walter, he said, his voice low, we're a family now. Then we'll learn to act like one, I said, starting with thankfulness and ending with taking responsibility. I walked into the hall and took my coat off the old brass hook that was never quite straight. In the mirror by the door, the face I saw was the face I'd earned. Lines where laughs used to be, lines where other people's problems had set up shop. My eyes were my father's, hazel and stubborn. Outside, the night smelled like wet leaves and the last of the frost. The streetlights flicked on one after the other. A slow, quiet parade. The cul-de-sac looked just as perfect as it always does, with its neat bushes, the basketball hoop with its half-torn net, and a wreath on a door that wasn't quite ready for spring yet. I walked to my truck, which was a decade old, paid off, and as reliable as a dog that knows it'll get fed. I drove home with the window cracked. The radio found some jazz, just a piano and a drum brush on a snare, busy but peaceful. The red light at 2nd and Elm took its sweet time. I didn't mind. When I turned onto my street, a robin landed on the curb, looked at me, and then hopped away like it had just remembered a more important meeting. The house greeted me the way houses do when you've lived in them long enough to learn their sounds. A creak by the front door, the furnace hum that always starts a second after you think it won't. I didn't head for the TV or the kitchen. I went straight to the study. The door sticks in the summer, but in March it slides right open. The air smelled of lemon oil and paper, the scent of a life documented. Eleanor's old brass lamp sat on the corner of the desk. I turned the dimmer until the bulb hummed softly and the light fell across the maple wood. The filing cabinet was there, standing like a monument. Labels in big letters. Blue tabs for mortgage payments. Green for vehicles. Yellow for school. Red for medical stuff. White for miscellaneous because no plan survives real life. I pulled out a blue folder at random. The one marked 2017, and spread the papers out on the desk. The numbers told a story. Bank statements, old checks, little notes I'd written to myself when a promise got twisted. $2,800, $2,800, $2,800. I could see the first time I'd rounded up to cover a late fee, and the 10th time. In the green folder, a lease for a car that had never smelled like my own life. In yellow, tuition bills stamped received, as if that ink could bless the choice. In red, the receipts that make you feel like a good guy even when they hurt. Dental braces, emergency room visits, a night at urgent care when Klaus broke his wrist. There are checks a man writes gladly, even when they sting. I didn't bother adding it all up. The total wasn't the point tonight. The point was my stance. The point was remembering that a father can stand tall without being cold. On a yellow legal pad, I wrote a single sentence and underlined it once. As of tomorrow, I have stopped all financial assistance to Helena and Sebastian, with the exception of essentials for the grandchildren, which I will pay for directly. I read it out loud to the empty room until the words sounded like a plan, not a wish. My phone lit up and buzzed. It was Helena. Dad, can we talk? Please not like this. A minute later, a text from Sebastian. Whatever you're doing, stop. This is pathetic and cruel. Then another one. We'll talk about this tomorrow and fix this mess. The "we" in that message made me smile, but not in a funny way. I put my phone face down and slid it into the drawer with the tape measure, batteries, and the little screwdriver I always use for the wrong things. I made decaf because sleep is more important than acting tough. The kettle sang. The good mug warmed my hands. I stood in the kitchen and remembered the first morning after Eleanor died. How coffee had tasted like a betrayal because the world had the nerve to keep doing something so small and good without her. Time changes things, even what coffee means. Now it tasted like a quiet middle. What comes after the ending and before the beginning? Back in the study, I opened another notebook. Calls. On a fresh page, I wrote tomorrow's date. Underneath it, a list. First National Bank Mortgage Autopay. Terminate. Northwood Insurance Auto/Home. Remove linked account. Crestview Academy tuition. Stop. Request direct payment for Klaus and Freya. Utilities reimbursements. Cancel. Financial advisor. Redirect monthly outflow to retirement and travel savings. Below that, I wrote one more line, a little bit of a treat for myself. Get a quote for a trip to the Smokies in May. A man needs something to look forward to that isn't just about getting away from something. I turned off the lamp and let the room go dark around my decision, then went to bed. In the quiet, the furnace clicked, the house settled. A siren wailed somewhere far off, and a dog barked once, then thought better of it. I slept. Morning showed up just like it always does, not caring one bit about what I'd decided. The light had that honest look that makes even dust seem sincere. I poured myself a real cup of coffee, buttered some toast, and sat at the desk to make my first call. The phone menu for First National Bank felt like an old hallway I'd walked down way too often. When a real person answered, her name was Katrin, and her voice sounded sharp. I confirmed my identity, and then canceled the automatic mortgage payments from my checking account. She gave me a confirmation number. I wrote it in the margin, circled it, and underlined it. Next call, insurance. Then the school. The tuition autopay was stopped. I asked the bursar about paying for Klaus and Freya directly. She said that was fine and would send me the details via email. The utility reimbursements are history. I spoke to my financial advisor and told him to expect the extra cash. He said, "About time," then apologized, and I laughed, because the truth and an apology can live together. At 8:53 a.m. my phone showed Helena's name. I let it ring twice and then answered. "Dad," she said, her voice shaky. "The bank called. They said our payment bounced. That can't be right. There's always." She caught herself. "You've always." She stopped again. "I canceled the autopay," I said, "just like I told you I would." There was a silence where I could hear my child, a grown-up with the same old worries. "You didn't even give us a warning." "I warned you last night," I said. "You just didn't believe me." Her voice got tight. "What are we supposed to do? The payment's due today." "You and Sebastian have paychecks," I said. "You'll do what families do. You'll budget. You'll cut. You'll prioritize." "You make it sound so simple," she said. "It isn't simple," I admitted. "It's for grown-ups." "Dad," she whispered. "The kids. I'll pay the school directly until the end of this term." I said. And their medical and their activities within reason. But I'm not going to run money through you anymore. That part of our life is over. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Sebastian will call you, she said, and hung up before I could say that he already had. At 9:17 he did. He didn't waste time on hellos. You are not going to humiliate us, he said. Reverse the payments now. No, I said. You can't just abandon your responsibilities as a father. My responsibilities as a father, I said, include raising a daughter who can stand on her own 2 feet. They don't include carrying her husband. Watch your tone, he snapped. I've watched my tone for 16 years, I replied. Today I'm watching my bank account. People will hear about this, he said. You think you look like a saint? You'll look like a bitter old man who bailed on his own family. I think, I said, that they'll hear whatever we tell them. I think the truth has a way of getting around on its own. And I think you should hang up and start making a plan. He swore and then ended the call. Texts started coming in like a sudden rainstorm after that. Some from Helena, some from numbers I only knew as neighbors, and some from strangers who'd only heard one side of the story. I didn't answer. I just closed my eyes and pictured Klaus at the free throw line, bouncing the ball twice, getting his feet set. I pictured Freya's fingers above the piano keys, that tiny moment before she starts to play when the whole room seems to hold its breath. The doorbell rang around mid-morning. I looked through the peephole and saw a package on the mat. It was a pair of hiking boots I'd ordered a few weeks ago and completely forgotten about. The box felt like a dare. I carried it to the kitchen and set it next to the guidebook that had arrived yesterday. The Smokies in Spring. I opened it to a map and traced a trail with my finger. The page smelled like fresh ink and hope. By noon, I had 3 voicemails. The first was Helena, trying hard to keep the panic out of her voice. The second was Sebastian, who hadn't even tried to hide it. The third was from the school's bursar, polite as could be, confirming that the auto payment was stopped and that they'd send me a direct payment link. I made a sandwich and ate it standing up, watching a squirrel outside the window trying to decide if the top of the fence was a road or a wall. At 1:05 p.m. the house let out that satisfied pop that old wood makes when the sun finally hits it. I took the legal pad and wrote one more line below my list. When they ask why, give a simple answer. No long speeches, no shame, just the truth. Then I underlined simple answer. If I've learned anything from 40 years of designing things that have to last, it's that clarity is the strongest steel. By the afternoon, I could feel the ripple moving through our little world. A text from a neighbor that just said, "You okay?" A message from Werner at the hardware store. "Heard a version of your story at Muller's last night. Call me if you want to know what's going around." I didn't call him back. Not yet. Not every ripple needs a rock thrown in. I sat in my chair. It was Eleanor's chair, really. I just kept it warm for her. And I let the last 16 years unspool in my mind, one honest frame at a time. The first bits of thanks had turned into expectation. The small feeling of entitlement had grown teeth. The holidays where I smiled while someone toasted to hard work I knew hadn't paid for the champagne. I thought of Eleanor in the hospice, her hand in mine, her voice as clear as a bell ringing in the winter. Take care of our girl. I would still. But taking care of someone without setting boundaries just rots things. It turns into something that looks like love but tastes like resentment. As the evening came, the light in my office turned the color of weak tea. I turned the lamp on again, not because I needed it, but because it made the room feel like my own again. On the desk, the folders sat in calm stacks. Under my hand, the legal pad felt like a small vow made to the only person who needed to hear it. Me. People think revenge is a fire. It's not. Not for guys like me. It's a thermostat turned to a new setting. It's the click you hear, and then the air changes and the house learns the difference between being comfortable and being too expensive. Tonight, with the phone quiet and the papers put away, I understood something very simple. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was just adjusting the load. Bridges don't hate the cars that cross them. They just fall apart when someone ignores the weight limits. The sun slipped out of the room. The streetlights took over, steady as ever. I closed the blue folder and the green and the yellow and the red, and I put them back where they belonged. I rinsed my mug and left it to dry. I locked the front door, then unlocked it again because this house has never needed to be a fortress. I stood at the window and watched nothing in particular for a long time, the way you do when you've made a decision that will force you to keep making it. Tomorrow would bring arguments, pleas, and a dozen different versions of the story told in a dozen different voices. It might bring shame, thrown at me like a sheet trying to cover up the furniture. It might bring an apology or it might not. I couldn't control that part. What I could control was staying true to the sentence I had written and to the man who wrote it. I turned off the lights, and the house held its ground. That night, sleep was more of a visitor than a resident. It showed up late, left early, and didn't bother to tidy up after itself. I woke up before sunrise, the ceiling barely visible in the cold, blue light of a March morning. The furnace had clicked on, but the air still felt thin. For a few minutes, I just lay there, listening to the steady beat of my heart, a reminder that I was very much alive, even if the rhythm of my life was about to change. I thought about the dinner table, Sebastian's smirk, Helena's hand frozen over the bread basket, the way the room had gone so tense. It would have been easier, maybe even kinder, to just let it go. Pretend it was a joke, swallow the insult, and let the old agreement keep going for another month. But easier isn't always the best way. Sometimes the easiest path is the one that gives way under your feet when you're halfway across. The coffee pot gurgled in the kitchen. The sound was oddly comforting. I made my first cup stronger than usual, the kind that could stand up on its own. The bitterness was a good anchor. Outside the window, the neighborhood was still. Empty driveways, quiet porches, dark houses. Somewhere down the block, a single porch light glowed like an eye that couldn't close. By 8 o'clock, I was in the study with the top drawer of the blue filing cabinet open. The folders were all lined up, neat as you please, each year a book I could read without turning a single page. I pulled out the one marked 2010 to 2011 and set it on the desk. The smell of old paper hit me, a faint mix of ink, envelope glue, and the sharp tang of toner. It's the smell of things people forget they've promised. The first check was dated March 3, 2010. $2,800 to First National Bank, with mortgage help, written in the memo line. I remember writing it in Eleanor's absence, like a man filling a hole in the ground before it rains. Helena had called a couple of weeks after the funeral. She'd been crying, but she was careful not to let her voice crack until she knew I'd say yes. Dad, we're behind. Just this month we'll get caught up. Just this month. It's a phrase that should come with a big warning sign. The April check was the same amount. May 2. In June, there was an extra $300 for an overdue utility bill. The envelope had been stuffed into the mortgage folder, a sign that the line between help and habit was already getting blurry. By August, Sebastian had called to thank me and, in the same breath, asked if I could just roll it in to keep things simple. That's how a rope around your wrist feels at first. Soft, almost helpful. You don't even notice the knots until you try to pull away. In the green folder for 2012, I found the first note about the car loan help. Sebastian's old Honda had finally died, or so he claimed. The new loan was for a medium-sized SUV, safe for the kids, he'd said. Though Helena later admitted that the sales manager was a college buddy who'd cut them a deal. My part was $500 a month. He told me it would only be for a year until his commission structure got better. It lasted for 9. By 2014, the yellow folder was getting thick. Tuition bills from Crestview Academy, a private school with a theater program Helena just loved, and a cafeteria menu fancier than my first apartment's kitchen. Public school isn't an option, she told me once over coffee. We want Klaus and Freya to have opportunities we didn't have. I bit my tongue, not mentioning that I'd gone to public school and still managed to engineer bridges that were still standing a decade later. I didn't just pay tuition. I covered summer camp deposits, music lessons, and even the technology fee for the tablets each student got. It was almost funny. I was funding the kind of childhood you see in fancy TV shows, complete with monogram backpacks and field trips to the state capitol. But the joke, if there was one, had no laughter in it. The red folder was more complicated. Medical bills don't arrive on a neat schedule. They show up like storms. A sudden flu that hits both kids the week Sebastian's insurance lapses, a broken wrist from a fall off the playground, and dental braces that were medically necessary. I never minded these expenses the way I minded the others. Health was different. You can't negotiate with a fever or a broken bone, but even these had their little extras. Bills for cosmetic procedures, emergency urgent care visits that could have been handled at a clinic for a quarter of the price. All right, I'll take that next part of the story and rewrite it for you, keeping the same style and making the requested changes. Here are the names I found and their new counterparts. Names found and replaced: Frank Walter, Chase Sebastian, Lauren Helena, Diane Eleanor, Mason Klaus, Ava Freya, Harris Schroeder, Mrs. Bennett Frau Weber, Dave Werner, Bill Henderson Heinrich Meyer, Nancy Ingrid. The new story. As I went through the records, I didn't see one big problem, but 1,000 little ones. There was a Caribbean cruise from 2015, billed as a once-in-a-lifetime family memory, that somehow needed my credit card for the down payment. There was a kitchen remodel in 2017, with a fancy farmhouse sink and imported tile Helena had always wanted. And Christmases where the pile of wrapping paper was so big it swallowed the living room. Every gift tagged from Mom and Dad. While I sat on the couch with a polite smile on my face. The total by 2023 was $892,000. I'd done the math before, but seeing it all laid out on paper year after year made my gut clench. It was the kind of money you could buy a second house with or retire 5 years sooner or just travel. Eleanor and I had always talked about seeing the Grand Canyon together, renting a little camper, waking up to the desert sun. She used to say, "If we wait until we're ready, we'll never go." We never did. At 9:30, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Helena. "Can you come over later? Kids have questions." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I closed the folders and stacked them up neatly. The order felt good. It meant I was still in charge of something. I made another cup of coffee and took it out to the back porch. The air was sharp, the kind that wakes you up from the inside out. A couple of robins were hopping along the fence, looking for something they'd lost or hadn't found yet. I thought about my own father, a mechanic who raised 3 kids on a paycheck that never hit 6 figures. He taught me that your word is only as good as the effort you're willing to put in to keep it. Somewhere along the way, I had changed keep it to do everything, even when they stopped noticing. By the time I finished my coffee, I decided I would go over. Not to argue, to explain. Helena's house looked just the same as it had last night. The tidy yard, the wreath on the door, the SUV in the driveway. But I saw something new. A thin stack of envelopes on the porch table, probably mail she'd grabbed and then forgotten about. She opened the door before I could even knock twice. "Dad," she said, her voice a mix of relief and nerves. "Come in." The kids were at the dining room table with their homework spread out. Klaus had his earbuds in but pulled them out when he saw me. Freya gave a faint smile and then went back to looking at her notebook. "Can we talk in the kitchen?" Helena asked. In the kitchen, a pot of coffee was sitting half full on the warmer. She poured herself a cup but didn't offer me any. That told me everything I needed to know before she even started talking. "Sebastian's at work," she started. "But the kids heard us talking last night. Klaus is worried about his basketball league." Freya asked if she's still going to her recital next month. I didn't know what to tell them. "You tell them that Grandpa said he will take care of their activities, their school, and their health directly," I said. "Always." She just nodded, her eyes on her mug. "They don't understand why you're stopping everything else. They're just kids," I said softly. "They shouldn't have to get the whole picture. But you should." "I do," she said quickly. Then she hesitated. "Or at least I'm starting to. But Dad, it's a lot. The mortgage, insurance, utilities. It's more than we can handle right now." "Then you make some changes," I said. "You downsize, you adjust, you live within what you make." Her eyes shot up at me. "It's not that simple." It's exactly that simple, I replied. It's not easy, but it's simple. She took a long drink of coffee, just buying time. Sebastian feels like you blindsided him. He thinks, I know what Sebastian thinks. I cut in. He made that pretty clear last night. But this isn't about him feeling blindsided. It's about me refusing to stay blind any longer. Helena set her cup down. You've always been there for us. I guess I thought you always would be. I will be, I said. For you, for the kids. But not for the version of being there that means paying for things you could choose not to have. She swallowed hard. So this is it? No turning back? This is it, I confirmed. And if Sebastian wants to talk, I'm ready. But the decision stands. When I left, the sun was higher in the sky, making sharp shadows across the street. I could feel the weight of everything that had been said, and everything that hadn't, sinking in. The next couple of months weren't going to be easy. There would be anger, haggling, and maybe even silence. But there would also be a space for something new, accountability. Back home, I sat at my desk and pulled out the yellow legal pad. Underneath yesterday's notes, I wrote, met with Helena, explained boundaries, left the door open for a chat. No give on the main points. I capped the pen and leaned back. Outside, the robins were still on the fence, patient in their search. I hoped Helena would be the same. Patience, after all, is just another form of work. And I was done being the only one working. By the time I pulled into my driveway that night, the street lamps had thrown long yellow streaks across the pavement. I sat there for a minute with the engine still running, my hands on the wheel. Outside looked peaceful. Inside felt like a room with all the windows nailed shut. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't calm you down. It just squeezes you. In that pressure, I finally admitted what I'd been pretending not to see. There was no going back. Sebastian's insult at dinner still buzzed in my ears. Not like words, but like an electric shock. Helena hadn't really stuck up for me as much as she'd just tried to calm everyone down. That told me everything I needed to know. I turned the key, shut off the engine, and went inside. The apartment had a faint smell of pine cleaner. I'd done a good job of cleaning that morning. I didn't turn on the TV. I went for the black leather notebook in my desk drawer, the one with the worn gold letters. The truth never needs to shout. I'd been writing in it for a couple of months. Transfers I'd made just this one time. The extra credit card I'd let Sebastian use for work expenses, which had turned into fancy dinners for two in cities I'd never been to. Small favors that cast long shadows. Pattern doesn't just show up. You uncover it one line at a time. Morning found me at a corner table at the coffee shop. Black coffee was getting cold while a spreadsheet waited for me to finish telling it the truth. Retaliation doesn't start with anger. Anger is messy. Revenge starts with being precise. The bank statements were clear. Over 2 years, those small charges on the card I'd been paying off had added up to over $38,000. I remembered the months only vaguely, the way you remember the weather, a wet spring, a hot July. But the numbers remembered everything perfectly. Restaurants, new gadgets, and a boutique hotel bill on a Wednesday. There was another note in the notebook from 6 months earlier. Roof leak, transfer for repair. I'd wired the money the same day. 2 weeks later, I saw the roof was still the same, and I heard about a trip to Cancun. A man who doesn't want to know would call that a coincidence. I went home and started keeping records. 3 days after the dinner, I sat across from Schroeder in his office. He's a steady man, the kind you want between you and all the world's paperwork. He didn't ask for the whole story. He just let me tell the part that mattered. I was making changes. We canceled Sebastian's access. We moved money into accounts where only my signature counted. We changed the will not to cut Helena and Sebastian out, but to make any gifts conditional. Not out of spite, but out of common sense. You sure? Schroeder asked when we'd finished signing everything. I wasn't before, I said. I am now. That night at my kitchen table, I slid the signed papers back into a thick envelope and put it in the safe. Eleanor's framed photo was propped up against the fruit bowl. Not a shrine, just a habit. You told me to take care of our girl, I said to the air. Care without a limit. That's what we had. It's time to fix the leak. Phase 1 was simple. Stop the automatic payments. Sebastian's extra credit card? Cancelled at midnight. The SUV loan I'd been carrying for years? Autopay suspended. Tuition was now paid directly to the school, with instructions that I would pay for Klaus and Freya myself. None of this broke anything. It just stopped me from fixing what others kept choosing to break. 5 days later, Helena called. Her voice sounded thin and sharp. Dad, my card got declined at the store. Do you know why? Yes, I said. Why would you? Because it's not active anymore. You and Sebastian can handle your own expenses. Silence. Then the same old script started up. After everything, responsibilities, family. I didn't stay on the line long enough to hear it all. The old me would have tried to explain, maybe even apologize for being right. The man I was becoming kept the call short. Sebastian didn't call that day. That was just like him, let others clean up the small messes. He'd call when something bigger broke. From the outside, nothing about my life had changed. I still waved to neighbors, still took my morning walks, still made coffee in the dented blue mug Eleanor loved. But under the surface, the river had changed course. I'd been floating on it for too long. It was time to be the riverbank. The first public mess wasn't a big deal. It was just folding chairs and paper plates. Frau Weber, no relation, just a funny coincidence, hosted her early spring barbecue every year. It's the kind of get-together that helps a neighborhood remember itself after a long winter. When she knocked on my door that Saturday holding a flyer with clip art hot dogs, I said yes before I could think of a reason not to go. By 5 o'clock, her backyard was full of folding chairs and quiet laughter. Kids chased each other between the lilac bushes. The grill sizzled like a patient animal. I stood near the cooler, a cup of lemonade sweating in my hand, and just let the sounds wash over me. It felt almost like a cure, just being around people without having to take care of anyone. I didn't see Sebastian and Helena until I heard Helena's voice over the gentle hum of conversation. She was standing by the picnic table, talking to a couple of women I knew from the cul-de-sac. He's just been different, she said. Not loud, but with a kind of tone that knows it will be heard. We've always been able to count on Dad. This last month has been a lot. One of the women made a sympathetic sound. The other looked over at me, then quickly looked away, like she'd caught the sun in her eyes. I stayed where I was. The old me would have walked over, made a joke, and made everyone feel better. The man I am now knows that silence can be a mirror. Sebastian showed up late, just like he always did for events that weren't about him. He was wearing his usual casual, polished weekend uniform. Clean jeans, nice sneakers, and a watch that caught the light. He worked his way through the little groups with his easy charm, touching people on the shoulder, using their first names. He was good at being likable when it didn't cost him anything. At the grill, Herr Weber asked me about tomatoes as if we'd practiced this conversation for years. Going with the brandy wines again? He said. Always, I answered. They forgive mistakes, he chuckled. Wish people did. A gust of laughter rose and fell near the drinks table. I looked over and saw Sebastian with a group of neighbors, his hands moving as he talked, his eyebrows doing all the work of punctuation. I didn't have to get close to know what they were talking about. My name has a way of showing up in his explanations. By dusk, the yard was glowing with string lights and the happy feeling of full bellies. I found a chair on the edge of the crowd and sat down. Helena came up to me, a paper plate with a brownie balanced in her hand. Dad, she said, holding it out. You should try one before the kids eat them all. Thanks. I took the plate and the offering for what it was. She hung around for a second, then sat in the chair beside me. We watched Klaus throw a football to a boy from the next street over. Freya was following a couple of toddlers, picking up the plastic cups they were dropping one by one. I didn't mean to make it sound like. She trailed off. Like what? Like you're the bad guy. She picked at a corner of her napkin. It's just, her eyes were shiny in the soft light, but she didn't let the tears fall. People ask questions. I don't know how to answer them without telling the whole story. and the whole story makes me look ungrateful. I put the brownie down on the plate, untouched. Helena, I said, sometimes the whole story is the only thing that keeps you from drowning in your own lies. She looked out at the kids. Sebastian is scared, she said quietly. He doesn't say it like that, but he is. He'll get over being scared, I said. It's dignity he needs to learn. She winced a little, not because it was mean, but because it was true. You're going to be okay? She asked, turning the question back on me. The way kids do when they don't know where to put their worries. I already am, I said. Across the yard, someone called her name. She stood up, wiped her hands on her jeans, and left the brownie right where it was. Before I walked home that night, Frau Weber touched my arm. You look lighter, she said. Maybe I finally am. Good, she said. Light travels farther. On Monday, Schroeder called. He never wasted time with small talk, which is one reason I trust him. They tried to get into the discretionary account again, he said, from Sebastian's office line. Block it, I said. It's already done. He cleared his throat, that little sound he makes before changing the subject. Walter, I know you don't want to use the past against them, but if this turns into gossip, you're allowed to answer with the facts. I plan to, I said plainly. No long speeches. Good, he said. Plain is the best steel. I smiled. He had a way of echoing my own thoughts back to me. The first rumor reached me through Werner at the hardware store. Tuesday afternoon, I stopped in for some sandpaper and left with some information. Heard Sebastian at Muller's last night, Werner said, leaning on the counter like a spy. Telling anyone who would listen that you'd decided to teach them a lesson by cutting off your grandkids. He used the word, abandoned. Did he? I folded the sandpaper in half and then again, feeling the grit change under my fingers. Heinrich Meyer was there, Werner went on, lowering his voice. Remember, he sold them the BMW a few years back. He said something like, funny how that lease got paid when Sebastian's sales were down. Wonder who covered that. And then Werner said, you could have heard a fly sneeze. I thanked him, paid, and left. On the sidewalk, the afternoon sun was trying its best to warm up a day that hadn't made up its mind. I stood there for a minute and let it try. The second rumor didn't even try to hide. Wednesday evening at the grocery store, a woman named Ingrid, with a sharp tongue and a soft heart when she remembers to use it, cornered me by the produce section. Walter Weber, she said, with her hands on her hips like a gunslinger. I can't believe what I've heard. What have you heard? I asked, picking out a melon with more care than the job required. That you've turned your back on your own flesh and blood, on those kids. I set the melon down gently. I've paid for those children's school and their doctor's visits for years, I said, not raising my voice. And I will continue to do so directly. I'm just done paying for the adult's lifestyle. She blinked. Lifestyle? The BMWs, the vacations, the renovations? I watched her face as she did the math. 16 years. $892,000. I have records for every penny. Would you like to see them? She opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. No, she said finally, her voice a little softer. I guess not. Then maybe, I said, we'll save the words abandoned and cruel for stories that deserve them. She nodded, a little humbled. You were always the calm one, she said. I'm trying to stay that way, I said. Friday afternoon at school pickup, I parked across the street and waited for Klaus and Freya to come out with the rest of the kids. The principal, a nice woman with a voice that carries without yelling, walked from the curb to my truck. Mr. Weber, she said, I wanted to thank you for setting up the direct payments. It makes things so much simpler. I'm glad, I said. They didn't need to be caught in the mess of the rest of it. No, they didn't, she agreed. Her eyes had that kind, gentle look that teachers get after decades of dealing with other people's kids. Freya's recital is next Thursday. Klaus's team made it to the playoffs. I'll be there, I said. Helena came out of the school door, looking for something on the sidewalk, worry tucked into her shoulders. She spotted me and raised a hand. I raised mine back. The kids ran to her, talking about their day and snacks. I watched them drive away in the SUV I'd helped pay for. The sight barely bothered me. Not because I'd stopped caring, but because caring had finally learned the difference between carrying and enabling. That weekend, the community center hosted its spring cleanup, a chance for people to earn the kind of belonging you can't buy. I showed up early with a pair of work gloves and an old rake. The morning had a chill that was just about to leave but would probably be back. Sebastian and Helena arrived mid-morning. He was wearing a sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed up and a smile that looked like it was for the cameras. She had an expression that looked like a truce with a problem she couldn't quite name yet. We were repainting a low fence along the park when the mayor wandered over, with his civic grin in place. Sebastian stepped forward. "You know," he said to the mayor, "we've been thinking about taking over the management of a little family property. Make it useful for the community. Maybe rent it out for retreats, donate weekends for local programs." The mayor nodded politely. "That's generous," he said. "Where is this property?" Sebastian's eyes darted to me and back again, fast as a heartbeat. "By the lake," he said. "It's been sitting and used. A new pair of hands could do wonders." I set my paintbrush down in the tray, wiped the handle clean with a rag, and walked over, slowly enough to give him time to choose a different thing to say. He didn't. "Mayor," I said, "that property belongs to me. It's not under new hands." A small silence opened up, polite but very clear. Sebastian recovered quickly. "Of course," he said, half laughing. "We're just talking about ideas. Ideas are best discussed with the owners," I said. The mayor coughed into his fist, the universal sign for, "I'll let you two work that out." He walked away toward a group of volunteers who needed some praise. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Was that necessary?" he asked under his breath. "Yes," I said. "Necessary is what you call a thing you do before someone makes a bigger mess." He dipped his brush, turned away, and painted the same spot a second time. That night, the phone rang while the news mumbled headlines I couldn't bring myself to care about. Schroeder again. "You rattled him," he said. "He called about shared rights and family assets. I told him to have his lawyer call me. He said he didn't need one." "That's never true." "Never," I agreed. Schroeder paused. "You know, the next part of this gets louder." "I know," I said. "I've been saving my hearing." Sunday, I went to church for the first time since Eleanor's funeral. Not because I was looking for answers, but because rituals remind us how to stand up straight when we forget. The sermon was about desserts and manna, the kind of story that sounds old-fashioned until you've spent years feeding people who never learned how to plant. Afterward, in the fellowship hall, people shook my hand with that polite firmness that says, "I heard something and I don't know if it's true." One man, retired like me, squeezed my shoulder and said, "Sometimes being kind looks like saying no." I nodded. We didn't need any more words. On Monday, Helena showed up at my apartment without calling first. She didn't ring the doorbell like she was in a hurry. Just once, then again, patiently, like someone hoping you're home. I opened the door. She stood there in a sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled back with no armor on. For a second, she looked 16 again, asking for the car keys. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course." She sat at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around her mug, as if she was borrowing its warmth. "I'm sorry," she said after a while, not looking up, "for the things I've said to people. For the things I didn't correct when Sebastian said them." "You don't owe me an apology for things he says," I said. "But I'll take the one for the things you didn't correct." She gave a tiny, huffing laugh. "Fair." We sat in a comfortable quiet long enough to hear the refrigerator kick on. She lifted her eyes. "He's going to push harder," she said. "He's not himself when he's scared." "He is himself when he's scared," I said gently. "That's the whole point." She blinked, then nodded. "I'm trying to grow a new backbone," she said. "It's tough." "I know," I said. "Bones grow slow." She stood up to leave and hesitated at the door. I told the kids you'd be at Freya's recital. I'll be there, Dad. Yes. Thank you for still being kind even when you're being firm. They're not opposites, I said. She left, and the apartment felt bigger, not more empty. By the middle of the week, the neighborhood rumor mill had done its work. Fewer questions came with sharp edges. More came out of plain curiosity. I answered all of them the same way, plainly. 16 years. Direct support for the grandkids continues. The adults are learning to manage. I didn't offer any numbers unless I was asked. When I was asked, I gave them. It's tough to argue with a ledger. The most surprising conversation I had was in the aisle of the hardware store where the paint rollers are. A man I barely knew, with a bowling team shirt on and hands stained with something honest, came up to me and said, "My boy tried the same thing. Took me too long to draw a line. Wish I'd done it sooner." Sooner is a cruel word, I said. Yeah, he answered. But sometimes later is a kindness. We just stood there for a minute. Two men looking at paint rollers like they held the secret to everything. Saturday, the community center had its big fundraiser gala. A silent auction, a buffet that tried to be fancier than it was, and a string quartet working hard in a corner. I'm not a big fan of events where everyone shows off how generous they are, but the center has been good to kids who needed a place to go after 3 o'clock. So I bought a ticket and a black tie that I knew how to wear. Sebastian and Helena were there. She wore the kind of dress that doesn't apologize for being simple. He wore the kind of suit that apologizes for nothing. I stayed on the edges. Halfway through the night, the MC announced a new silent auction item. A weekend at a lakeside cabin donated by a longtime community member. I didn't even flinch. It wasn't my cabin. I'd made sure of that. It was somebody else's, and the description was deliberately vague. Sebastian glanced at the table, then at me, then at the table again. For a second, I could see him thinking. Make a big show of winning it. Prove they're still a certain kind of family. They bid on it. Someone else outbid them. They bid again. I left before the bidding ended. Some demonstrations collapse under their own weight without my help. Outside, the night had that spring dampness that almost feels like forgiveness. I loosened my tie as I walked to the truck. My phone buzzed. Schroeder. "You're about to see a different kind of pressure," he said. "Get ready for a bigger story." "I'm ready," I said, "and I have the receipts to prove it." Sunday evening, I laid the black leather notebook on the desk and turned to the last page. The columns were neat. Dates, places, what was said. Not because I planned to use gossip in court, but because I am who I am. A man who believes the truth doesn't need to shout, but it does need to be written down. Names found and replaced. Jen E. Eleanor. Frank Walter. Lauren Helena. Chase Sebastian. Harris Schroeder. Victor Victor. The new story. Eleanor's old brass lamp sat right there on the corner of the desk. I twisted the dimmer switch down until the little wire inside the bulb hummed a quiet tune. The light spread over the paper like a small, private sunrise. "They're going to push harder now," I said to the empty room. "We'll just push back a little at a time. And if that doesn't work, well, we'll make some noise." The whole house seemed to sigh around me. Out on the street, some dog let out a couple of barks, then figured it wasn't worth the trouble and went quiet. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on the cover. The mask I had been wearing had finally cracked. I knew that wasn't the last sound I was going to hear. I have always believed that numbers do not lie. People do. Memories do. Even photographs can be altered. But numbers, they are brutally honest. And for the first time in months, I was ready to listen to what they had to say. It was a Wednesday morning. The kind of dreary, gray day that makes the coffee pot work overtime. The kitchen was silent except for the steady drip-drip of the coffee maker. I sat at the table with my laptop open, a yellow legal pad on my right, and the old leather binder on my left. It had a faint smell of dust and cedar, the scent of things kept hidden for far too long. This was the day I made up my mind to follow every single dollar. Helena and Sebastian probably thought I wasn't paying attention. They probably assumed the retirement checks, the rental money, and the few stocks I kept in a quiet corner of the market were just flowing along, untouched. But I had been watching the withdrawals like a hunter tracks footsteps in fresh snow. Each one of them was telling me more than the one before it. I started with the bank statements. The first couple of months after they talked me into streamlining, my finances looked pretty normal. Groceries, utility bills, a few small online orders. But then, slowly, the water started to get warmer. $300 at a high-end restaurant downtown. $1,200 for home improvements. Even though nobody had hammered a nail or painted a wall in this house since Eleanor left. By the 6th month, it was pretty obvious. There were payments to Sebastian's consulting business, which, as far as I could tell, was just him sitting in front of a computer screen yelling at people over Zoom. Then came the charges from fancy boutiques. Helena had never been subtle about her taste for handbags that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Every red number was like a breadcrumb, and I followed them all. I used my highlighter on the patterns, drew circles around the dates. Sebastian's birthday, Helena's spa weekends, that supposed family emergency trip to Las Vegas that I was not invited on. The more I dug, the calmer I got. I was not angry, not yet, just cold. It was the kind of calm you feel when you have stopped struggling in deep water and decided to swim straight for the shore. Around mid-morning, I called Schroeder. "You have been quiet," he said as a greeting. Quiet means you are either making peace with the situation or sharpening the axe. "Which one is it?" I smiled even though he could not see it. "Both." "Ah, my favorite combination." Papers rustled on his end of the line. "What's the plan?" "I am not ready to show my hand yet, but I need you to get something ready for me. A transfer of the rental deeds back into my name only." Quietly. "Are you sure?" "As sure as the sunrise," I said. "But not yet. Timing is everything." We talked in careful half-sentences after that, the way men do when they know someone might be listening. Schroeder was one of the few people I trusted completely, but trust did not mean I could afford to be careless. When we hung up, I went back to the numbers. That's when I saw a $4,800 withdrawal labeled bridge loan repayment. It was dated exactly 2 weeks after the dinner where Sebastian had called me a loser. My jaw clenched. I did not have to guess what that loan had paid for. It was the kind of discovery that does not make you yell. It makes you lean back in your chair, stare at the ceiling, and think, all right, now I know exactly where to make the cut. That afternoon, I decided to take a drive down to the marina. Not for the boats. I have never cared much for sailing, but for the peaceful quiet. There is something about the sound of water slapping against the hulls of boats that clears a man's mind. I sat on a bench overlooking the docks, watching seagulls fighting over scraps. My father used to tell me, when you are dealing with someone greedy, watch them like you would watch gulls. They will fight over something that is not even theirs just because it's there. It was right there, with the smell of salt and oil in the air, that I finalized the next step. I was not just going to cut them off financially. I was going to change the entire course of the river so they would never even see the water again. By the time I got home, the house was empty. Helena's car was gone, and so was Sebastian's. I went straight to the safe in the study. The code was still mine alone, a small blessing. Inside were the property deeds, the trust documents, and the letters Eleanor had left me before the separation. I pulled out the papers I needed, locked the rest back in, and slid the key into my pocket. I spent the next 2 hours scanning, emailing, and filing things away in places only I knew. Every single click of the scanner felt like another brick in a wall. I was building a wall they would not even see until it was too late. Around 6 o'clock, I heard the garage door. Their voices came in together, a low murmur of a normal conversation. I did not move from my seat at the table. "Hey, Dad," Helena said as she walked past, barely even glancing at me. She was carrying 2 fancy shopping bags. Sebastian followed her, wearing that same permanent smirk of his. "Big plans for the evening, Walter?" I looked at him and let my gaze rest for a beat too long. "Always." He laughed, not getting it. They went upstairs, the sound of their footsteps fading into the soft carpet of the hallway. That night, I made one more call, this time to an old friend from my construction days, a man named Victor, who now handled security systems. "Do you still do private installations?" I asked. For you, always. I need a few cameras placed around the house. They have to be discreet, and I do not want anyone but you to know about them. Did something happen? Not yet. He did not press me for more information. We set a date for the following week. By midnight, I was in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but it was not the peaceful quiet I remembered from years ago. This was a different kind of quiet, the stillness before a storm. And I was the one holding the first drop of rain. The next morning, Helena knocked on my door. She looked put together, dressed for lunch with her friends. Dad, could you transfer another $2,000 into the joint account? Sebastian has a business expense, and we are a little tight until next week. There was no please, no acknowledgement that I might have plans for my own money. I leaned back in my chair. No. She blinked as if the word had never been said to her before. What do you mean, no? I mean exactly that, I said. I set my coffee down. The bank is not your personal water faucet. Her eyes narrowed. Is this about the other night? You are being petty. I smiled, but it was not the kind of smile that invites company. You will understand soon enough. She huffed and left, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a metronome, counting down the time until the next argument. That weekend, I drove out to the old storage unit Eleanor and I had kept for a couple of decades. Inside were boxes of documents, tools, and mementos from the years before things went bad between us. I found what I was looking for in a battered metal file cabinet. The original blueprints for the rental properties. Why? Because blueprints tell you more than walls and doors. They tell you value. And I needed every bit of leverage I could get. Back home, I spread the plans across the dining room table. Each property had its own quirks that I knew by heart. The way the afternoon sun hit the upstairs windows, the weak spots in the plumbing that I had fixed with my own hands. They were not just assets. They were parts of my life, and I was not about to hand them over to a man who called me a loser. On Sunday evening, I called Schroeder again. I have everything ready, I told him. And you are sure you want to go through with this? He asked. I am past sure. I am settled. All right, he said. Then it is time we move to phase 2. His voice was calm, but I could hear the excitement in it. Schroeder had seen enough betrayals to know when the tide was about to turn. We talked about logistics, transfer procedures, and legal protections. Every detail was a nail in the coffin of their expectations. By the time we hung up, the sun had set. I stood at the window watching the streetlights flicker on, one by one. In that light, I could almost see the finish line. A life where my money, my property, and my dignity were mine again. It was not about revenge anymore. Not completely. It was about taking back what was mine. And taking back what is yours, I knew, is a process. Numbers do not lie, and neither would the outcome. I did not sleep much that night, not because of the argument or the look on Sebastian's face, but because silence has a way of becoming louder than words when the truth starts to come to the surface. I lay in bed, staring at the faint streetlights spilling through the blinds, listening to the old house creak as the temperature changed. Down the hall, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the hallway clock, and somewhere beyond that, the muffled sound of footsteps. They were slow, careful, the kind of movement people make when they do not want to be heard. I did not get up. Not yet. Sometimes letting someone think you are asleep tells you more than confronting them at the moment. I had learned that lesson decades ago on construction sites. Watch before you act. In the morning, I walked into the kitchen and found the coffee pot half full, the smell of it still hanging in the air. Helena sat at the table with her phone in one hand, her other hand wrapped around a mug. She did not look up when I entered. Morning, I said, keeping my voice flat. She mumbled something that might have been morning, without lifting her eyes from the screen. You were up late, I added casually, pouring myself some coffee. She froze for a fraction of a second, so small that someone else might have missed it, then took a slow sip. Could not sleep. I sat down across from her. Neither could I. That made her glance up just long enough for me to see the unease flicker in her eyes. She covered it up quickly, but I had seen it. It was the same look she had when she was 9 years old and tried to hide a broken vase behind the couch. The difference was that back then, she told the truth before the day was over. "Where is Sebastian?" I asked. "He went out early. Something about meeting a client." I nodded, even though we both knew that Sebastian's clients often had nothing to do with work. By noon, I was in Schroeder's office again, the blinds half closed against the late morning sun. He leaned back in his chair, looking through a folder he had been putting together for weeks. "Are you sure you want to move forward this quickly?" he asked. "I am sure," I replied. "The longer I wait, the more they will assume I am not serious." He slid a document across the desk toward me. "This gives us the authority to freeze the joint account and transfer the remaining money into the trust. Once it is in there, they cannot touch it without your permission." I signed it without a moment's hesitation. My signature looked different these days, sharper, less flowing, but the reason behind it was more solid than it had been in years. "Walter," Schroeder said, tapping the edge of the paper, "this is the point of no return. When they find out, it is going to get ugly." I gave a faint smile. "Schroeder, it is already ugly. This is just the part where I stop pretending it is not." That evening, I came home to find Sebastian in the living room, stretched out on the couch with his laptop open. He did not look up as I walked in, just muttered, "Hey, Walter," in that easy, dismissive tone he liked to use. I took off my jacket, hung it on the hook, and stood there for a moment watching him. The glow from the laptop screen lit up his face, highlighting the slight smirk that seemed permanently carved into his mouth. "How was your client meeting?" I asked. His smirk got wider, but he kept his eyes on the screen. "Productive." I walked past him toward the kitchen, but not before noticing the open tabs on his browser. Luxury rentals, a private yacht service, and a high-end watch store. I did not say anything. Some truths hit harder when they are not announced. The next couple of days were a strange mix of quiet and tension. Helena avoided long conversations. Sebastian kept to himself during the day, but made a lot of late-night phone calls in the backyard. And I spent most of my time looking over the documents Schroeder sent me. It was not just about the money. It was about control, about taking back the ground I had let slip away one quiet compromise at a time. On Thursday, Schroeder called. "It is done. The accounts are frozen. The trust is secure. And the villa transfer has been officially reversed. They cannot touch it." I thanked him, then sat in my chair by the window, staring out at the street where the maple trees had begun to turn gold. That was when I heard the front door open and close harder than usual. Sebastian's footsteps were heavy, on purpose, coming straight toward the living room. "Did you freeze the account?" he demanded before he was even fully in the room. I looked up slowly. "Good afternoon to you too, Sebastian. Do not play games with me, Walter." The bank called. Helena's card got declined at the store. "What the hell are you doing?" "I am doing," I said calmly, "what I should have done months ago." His voice rose. "This is our money, too." I cut him off. "No, Sebastian. This is my money, and I have decided it is no longer for sale." He stepped closer, his face turning red. "You are making a mistake. You think you can just—" "Yes," I interrupted again, my tone sharper now. "I think I can. And I just did." That night, I heard them arguing upstairs. My name floated through the air like an accusation, sharp and bitter. Helena's voice cracked with frustration, and Sebastian's was all heat and noise. I did not move from my chair. The thing about storms is that sometimes you have to let them break before you can see clearly again. 2 mornings later, Helena came downstairs early. Her hair was pulled back in a hurry. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "Dad," she started, standing in the kitchen doorway. "We need to talk." I gestured toward the table. She sat down, her hands wrapped around a mug she had not yet filled. "I know you are angry," she said. "I am not angry," I replied. "I am disappointed, and there is a difference." She flinched. I did not think you would cut us off completely," she said. "You did not think I would stand up for myself? Is that what you mean?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. I have been paying your bills, covering your debts, and letting Sebastian treat me like a burden in my own home, I continued. That ends now. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. It's not like we do not appreciate it. Appreciation is not measured in words, Helena, I said quietly. It is measured in respect, and I have not felt much of that lately. She looked away, and for the first time in weeks, I thought I saw a crack in her defenses. By Sunday, the tension had turned into something heavier, an unspoken understanding that the ground had shifted for good. That evening, as I sat on the porch, watching the last of the sunlight fade, Schroeder called again. Walter, he said, I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else. Sebastian's name came up in a fraud investigation. It looks like he has been taking money from more than one place. I stayed silent for a long moment, listening to the crickets begin their nightly chorus. Let me guess, I said finally. He thinks he can talk his way out of it. Probably, Schroeder replied. But with the paper trail we have, it is not going to be easy. I leaned back in my chair, the old wood creaking underneath me. Then let him try, because now the rules were not just changed, they were mine. Some men choose to roar before a fight. I have always preferred silence, not because I am afraid. Silence forces people to fill in the blanks themselves, and that is often more unsettling than anything you could say. For the week after that dinner, I moved like a ghost in my own house. I did not slam doors or raise my voice. I did not pack bags or make a scene. Instead, I made my morning coffee, read the paper, and went through my day as if nothing had happened, even though everything had. Sebastian avoided me, which was a relief. He liked to pretend to be the easygoing son-in-law, tossing half-smiles across the kitchen, speaking in that too loud voice of his. Now he walked a different path whenever I entered a room. Helena, on the other hand, had been on too many long phone calls in the den with the door closed. I could hear her voice, muffled but sharp, like the clinking of ice in a glass. One evening, I sat at the far end of the dining table, the only light coming from the small lamp by the window. The shadows stretched across the wood, swallowing most of the room. Schroeder's file lay in front of me, thick with the weight of preparation. Every page was a reminder that I was not reacting out of anger. I was carrying out a plan. Schroeder had been very clear in his advice. You have to let them believe they are in control until the exact moment you take it away, he had told me, leaning back in his chair. The shock will do half the work for you. Shock. It was an interesting tool. I had learned during my years in construction that people rarely see the cracks until the whole wall comes down. I wanted Sebastian to think the wall was solid right up to the last moment. That night, Eleanor called. She was the only one outside my little world of silence who knew everything. How's the old chessboard looking? She asked. Pieces are in place, I said. Some do not even know they are pieces yet. Her laugh was short. You are enjoying this more than you will admit. Maybe I was, but it was not enjoyment in a mean way. I felt good about it. It was the satisfaction of finally taking the wheel after just drifting along with the current for so many years. The next morning, I was out of the house early. Helena probably thought I was running errands. But really, I was going to meet Schroeder again. We sat in the back booth of a diner I have been visiting for a couple of decades. A place where the owner still remembers exactly how I like my eggs. Schroeder pushed a paper across the table towards me, his face not giving anything away. That is the transfer agreement for the accounts, he said. Sign it now, and you can move control over everything without their knowing about it. I read through it slowly, the smell of burnt toast and coffee drifting between us. The language was clean, solid as a rock. By the time my pen touched the paper, I knew there was no going back. On my way home, I took the long way, driving past the neighborhood where Helena had grown up. The old school still had the same cracked asphalt in the parking lot. I remembered the day she had graduated, the way she had looked out at the crowd until her eyes found mine. That moment used to mean something. Now it was just a photograph in a drawer I no longer opened. When I walked in, Sebastian was at the kitchen counter, cutting into a loaf of bread like it had personally offended him. He looked up from his work. "You were up pretty early," he commented. "Just some old habits," I replied, taking a seat at the breakfast nook. He did not push it, but I noticed the way his eyes lingered on me, as if he was trying to figure out if I was as calm as I seemed. That afternoon, I started moving things from my home office into boxes. Not the obvious kind, but small boxes, the kind you could stack without anyone paying attention. Photo albums from the family, personal records, and certain tools from my workshop. Things I did not plan on leaving behind. Every so often, I would see Helena walking past the doorway, pretending not to notice what I was doing. The days settled into a rhythm, with me taking small, deliberate actions. Schroeder would call with updates. Eleanor sent me some kind words of encouragement, and I kept my distance from the people who still thought they could test my patience. One night, long after the house had gone quiet, I stood in the kitchen with the back door open. The cold air slid across the tile floor, carrying with it the scent of wet grass and distant rain. I thought about what Schroeder had said, how the shock would do half the work for me. But the other half, that would be up to me. I pictured Sebastian's face when the floor dropped out from under him, the instant he realized the safety net he thought was mine had been cut a couple of weeks earlier. I imagined Helena's silence, sharp and brittle, as she tried to decide whether to defend him or herself. That image did not bring me joy. It brought me clarity. The morning after, I took a walk down to the hardware store. The owner, Klaus, had known me for years. I bought a small, sturdy lockbox. "Something valuable?" he asked as he rang me up. "Memories," I said. It was not entirely a lie. I put that lockbox way back in my closet, behind a jacket that nobody ever paid any attention to. Inside it, I placed a series of documents, titles, account information, and letters Schroeder had prepared. It was my insurance policy, sealed up and waiting. By the end of the week, the air in the house felt different. Not heavier, not lighter, just poised, like the pause between a draw and a strike. And I knew that when the time came, it would not be a conversation. It would be a revelation. They say revenge is best served cold, but nobody talks about the patience it demands, the discipline of waiting for the exact right temperature. Not just cold, but frozen. And by the time I made my first move, the ice in me was solid enough to sink ships. It began quietly, just like most real changes do. No shouting, no open arguments, just a shift in the air, the kind you do not notice until you realize you are breathing differently. The first step was the credit line. I had been covering for Helena and Sebastian's little emergencies for years. New appliances, surprise car repairs, and medical copays that somehow never came with receipts. Their financial life was an elaborate house of cards that I had been holding steady with my own hands. All I had to do now was let go. I started by calling the bank where my name was still listed as a cosigner on one of their cards. The woman on the other end was polite, almost cheerful. "Yes, Herr Schmidt, I see the account right here. Would you like to close it?" The words felt good coming out of my mouth. "Yes, close it. Today." There was a brief pause. I could almost hear the weight of the request landing on her desk. "Understood, sir. May I ask why?" I smiled even though she could not see me. "Let's just say the arrangement is no longer mutually beneficial." It was done in less than 5 minutes. I hung up, leaning back in my chair, and felt a peculiar lightness in my chest. Like I had been carrying a stone for so long, I forgot what it felt like not to have it pressing down on me. By evening, I knew the news had reached them. Sebastian's text came first. "Walter, weird thing. The joint card is not working. Some mistake." I did not reply. A half an hour later, Helena called. Her voice had that familiar blend of sweetness and panic she used when she wanted something from me. "Dad." "Hi. So, we were at the grocery store and the card kept getting declined. The bank said it was closed. Did you do something?" "Yes." Silence. I could picture her mouth opening then shutting again as she rethought her approach. "Why?" she finally asked, the word thin and sharp. I let a few seconds pass between us before answering. "Because Helena, I am done paying for the life you think you are entitled to." She inhaled like I had slapped her. "We have a child." You have a husband, and he has 2 hands. I am sure he can figure it out. I ended the call before she could launch into the usual speech about family obligations. The click of the receiver felt final. The next move came a week later. Sebastian had been using my garage workshop, my sanctuary, as if it were his personal storage unit. Power tools I had collected over decades, wood slabs I had been saving for projects, even my old fishing gear, all crammed in next to his boxes of half-assembled side hustle products. On a Tuesday morning, I called a local hauling company. By noon, 2 men in worn denim and steel-toed boots were backing their truck into the driveway. Everything in those boxes, I told them, pointing at Sebastian's corner of the garage. Take it to the storage facility on Pine Street. I have prepaid for 6 months. After that, it is not my problem. One of the guys nodded, not asking any questions. Professional discretion. I respected that. When Sebastian came home that evening, I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. His truck screeched to a stop. He got out, looking over the driveway like someone expecting to find a crime scene. Walter, where the hell is all my stuff? I took a slow sip. Pine Street Storage, Unit 24. You are going to need this. I held out a single silver key. You can't just. I can. And I did. The muscles in his jaw twitched. You are making a mistake. Maybe, but at least it is mine to make. He stood there for a beat, glaring at me, but there was nothing he could do without making himself look small. And Sebastian hated looking small. Every move I made was deliberate, spaced out just enough so they would never know what was coming next. I stopped the monthly automatic payments for their utilities, which naturally were in my name because, as they always said, it's just easier that way, Dad. I stopped ordering the gourmet meal kits they had grown used to, the ones that made them feel like they were cooking without ever touching a raw ingredient. I even canceled the subscription for the cleaning service that came every Thursday. And I watched quietly as the cracks began to show. The first Thursday without the cleaners, Helena texted me a photo of the kitchen. Dishes piled in the sink, counters sticky. See what you have done. This is what happens when you do not help. I did not reply. It was not about the mess. It was about them learning the difference between comfort and entitlement. Still, there was a part of me that remembered the little girl Helena used to be, the one who would fall asleep on my chest while I read her the same bedtime story for the 100th time. That memory pulled at me in quiet moments, whispering doubts. But then I would recall the dinner, the smirk on Sebastian's face, the way she did not even flinch when he humiliated me in front of everyone. And the doubts would dissolve like sugar in hot coffee. This was not cruelty. This was a correction. By late March, the silence between us had become its own language. No more casual visits. No more, hey, Dad, can you? Phone calls. When they did speak to me, it was clipped and transactional, exactly how they had treated me when I was still paying for their life. The irony was not lost on me. But I was not done. Not even close. The next phase would be bigger, sharper. It would not just take away their comforts. It would remove the illusion of control they had been clinging to. And when that day came, they would not just feel the chill of the ice I had been holding inside. They would feel it crack. There is a moment in every plan when silence stops being enough. For months, I had let my absence speak louder than my presence. I had pulled away the quiet pillars of their comfort, utilities in my name, insurance coverage, small subsidies Helena did not even know she was receiving. Each disappearance was met with grumbling and tension inside that house. But they still thought they were standing on solid ground. It was time to show them that the ground was made of glass. The morning began like any other. An overcast sky, the kind that drains the color from the street and makes everything look older, more fragile. I was at my kitchen table, the grain of the oak scarred from years of coffee mugs and toolboxes set down too hard. In front of me sat a folder. Inside, printouts, contracts, transfer papers. All the pieces I had been gathering quietly like a man collecting flint and tinder before striking a match. One page was a copy of the house deed. Not their house, the one they lived in now, which had been bought under Sebastian's name, even though Helena carried half the mortgage like a stubborn mule carrying someone else's load. No, This deed belonged to the small property they thought I had gifted them years ago, a cabin on Cedar Ridge, where they would go on weekends to drink wine and post filtered photos about unplugging. They never knew the truth. I had never transferred the cabin completely. Legally, I still owned it through a trust Sebastian never thought to read the fine print on. That was my first target today. I called Schroeder my lawyer, a man whose voice was always steady, even when delivering bad news to someone else. "Time to move on the Ridge property," I said. "Are you sure?" he asked, not because he doubted me, but because he knew the weight of the move. "Positive. List it by Monday. Private sale." I could almost hear the pen scratching across his legal pad. That is what I liked about Schroeder. No moral lectures, no small talk, just execution. By afternoon, I was standing in the driveway of the Cedar Ridge cabin. The wind smelled faintly of pine and old rain. The place looked exactly as I remembered, with siding that had darkened to a deep smoky brown. A wraparound porch where I had once sat with Helena when she was 12 years old, teaching her how to whittle a stick into something that was not quite a spear. I had thought moments like that would anchor us for life. I had been wrong. Inside, the cabin smelled like someone else's weekends. Cheap candles, cologne, and a faint trace of last night's wine. A framed photo sat on the mantel, Helena and Sebastian with their arms around each other, with that fixed smile people get when they are trying to prove something to an invisible audience. I lifted the frame, studied their faces for a moment, then set it face down on the mantel. This was not anger. This was preparation. I took inventory. My tools were still in the shed out back, a fishing rod in the corner, a few antique maps on the wall. Mine before they ever set foot here. Those would be gone before the listing photos were taken. The drive back into town was slow. I let it be. You do not rush the day you start dismantling a false kingdom. 2 days later, I sat in the parking lot of their bank. The envelope in my hand was thick with copies of documents Helena and Sebastian had never bothered to request themselves. Over the past year, I had quietly bought the small strip of land behind their house. Worthless to most, but it contained the only access point to the alley where they parked. They did not know that the right-of-way could be revoked. I walked in, nodded to the teller, and asked to speak to the branch manager. A middle-aged man with graying hair came out. His suit was a size too big. "I would like to file the paperwork," I said. He glanced at the forms, then at me. "You are cutting off their access." "Yes, effective immediately." The pen was heavy in my hand, but steady. When I left, I did not look back. I did not have to wait long for the first crack. That Friday night, my phone buzzed. "Helena." I let it ring out, then went to the voicemail. Her voice was a mixture of forced calm and the sharp edge of panic. "Dad, we got this notice about the driveway access. It must be a mistake, right? Call me." I did not. The following week, I moved to the part of my plan I had been saving, liquidating the last joint investment we shared. Years ago, before Sebastian had fully shown me who he was, I had agreed to go in with him on a small auto shop venture. He had pitched it as a side business, a way for us to bond. I had put up most of the money. He would run the day-to-day operations. Within 2 years, it was making a profit. But Sebastian's accounting was creative. I called our accountant and gave him the order: pull my share, sell my stake. I did not care if Sebastian scraped by after that. I only cared that he felt the ground shift under him. By the time Sebastian found out, it was already done. He showed up at my place on a Thursday evening. No warning, no call, just the rattle of my old screen door and his body filling it like an unwelcome shadow. "What the hell, Walter?" His voice was already raised. I did not invite him in. "Evening, Sebastian. You can't just pull your money out like that. Do you know what that does to the shop?" "I do. Helena is furious. She says you are trying to ruin us." I leaned against the door frame, letting the silence stretch out. "No, Sebastian. I am just taking back what is mine." For a second, he looked like he might lunge forward, but then he laughed, short, bitter. "You think you are teaching us a lesson? You are just making yourself the enemy." I let the corner of my mouth twitch, almost a smile. "I am comfortable with that. He left without slamming the door. That, more than anything else, told me he was shaken. From there, the weeks blurred into a steady dismantling. The cabin went under contract. Within days, a cash buyer, no conditions. The auto shop struggled, Sebastian trying to patch the hole my exit had left. The revoked driveway access forced them to park 2 streets over, hauling groceries through the rain. Helena called twice more, once to yell, once to plead. I answered neither. But there was one thing left. Something I had held back, not because it was not powerful, but because it was final. The trust. Years ago, after my wife passed away, I had set up a trust that Helena assumed she would inherit in full. She had even borrowed against it in her mind, talking about renovations and plans. What she did not know was that after the first signs of betrayal, I had rewritten it. The majority would now go to a scholarship fund in my wife's name, helping kids who had nothing, who understood the value of what was given to them. I scheduled the signing with Schroeder for a Wednesday morning. His office smelled faintly of paper and old wood polish, the kind of place where permanence lives. When I signed the last page, Schroeder looked up. That is it. Once this is filed, it is irreversible. Good, I said. Some things should be. Driving home, the streets felt different. Not lighter, revenge is not light, but clearer. The road ahead was short now, leading to one last meeting, one last reveal that would strip away whatever illusion they were still clinging to. I passed their house on the way. The blinds in the front window were half closed. I caught a glimpse of Helena at the table, with her head in her hands, Sebastian pacing in the background. For a moment, I felt the echo of something, regret, maybe, but it was faint, like a voice calling from the other end of a long hallway. This was not about destroying them. Not anymore. It was about ending the story on my terms. And the final chapter was coming. The morning after the meeting with my lawyer, the air outside felt strangely crisp, as if the world itself had been scrubbed clean. I woke before the sun, brewed a pot of black coffee, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the first pale light cut through the horizon. For years, mornings had been something I just got through without thinking. Another day, another set of bills, another cycle of silent tolerance. But now there was a clarity in the air I had not felt in decades. Sebastian's words from that dinner still echoed in my mind. What is it like to be a loser, Walter? The laughter, the smug tilt of his glass. I did not need to replay it to feel angry anymore. Now it was simply fuel. At exactly 8 a.m., I walked into my study, opened the leather-bound folder lying on the desk, and checked every document one last time. My lawyer, Schroeder, had called them airtight. The trust transfer, the withdrawal instructions, and the notices to tenants in the commercial property Sebastian thought he controlled. All of them were ready to be executed. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but it was steady. With each signature, I could almost feel the invisible chains loosen from my chest. By noon, the papers were in motion. The bank confirmed the wire transfer of my liquid assets into a private account that Helena and Sebastian would never see. The rental property, the one that had been paying for their vacations and upgrades to their kitchen, had a new owner. A young couple who had sent me a handwritten letter about wanting a fresh start. I sold it to them for less than the market value, just so I could close quickly. I did not need the money as much as I needed the clean break. That afternoon, I drove into town for my final stop, the notary's office. The receptionist, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes, took my identification and said, "This will not take long, Herr Schmidt." I almost laughed at the irony. The last 2 years had been nothing but long waiting, watching, enduring. Now it was all distilled into a few signatures and a faint, embossed stamp on paper. When I left the building, the late autumn sun was low enough to paint the street in amber light. I paused by the curb, watching people pass by with grocery bags, coffee mugs, their lives moving in rhythm with the ordinary. I realized that for the first time in years, my next step was not weighed down by someone else's expectations. The final gathering was not my idea. It was Helena's. She had called 2 days ago, her voice syrupy sweet, suggesting a chance to talk things through as a family. I knew better. Helena had learned from Sebastian. Invite you under the guise of civility, then corner you. But this time, I was walking in with my corner prepared. They chose a mid-tier steakhouse in the city, the kind of place with dark leather booths and music low enough for scheming. When I walked in, Helena and Sebastian were already seated. Sebastian wore a smirk so polished it could have been rehearsed. Helena's eyes flicked to the manila envelope in my hand. "Dad," she said, gesturing to the seat across from them. "I am so glad you came." I sat down, laid the envelope on the table without opening it. The waiter came, took our drink orders and left. Nobody touched the menus. Sebastian leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "So, we have thought about what you said the other night. We think there is a way forward, but you are going to have to be reasonable." "Reasonable," I repeated, tasting the word like a bad vintage of wine. "And what does that mean to you?" "It means," Helena cut in, "keeping things in the family. We know you have been making changes, selling things. That is rash. If we manage the assets, we can keep the income flowing. Everyone wins." I let the silence stretch, the way a fisherman lets the line play out before reeling it in. Then I slid the envelope towards Sebastian. He opened it, pulling out the first set of documents. His smirk faltered. Helena leaned over his shoulder, her expression tightening with every page. "What is this?" she asked, her voice higher now. "That," I said calmly, "is a copy of the trust transfer. As of this morning, none of the properties or accounts you have been enjoying are in my name. They are either sold in private holding or placed where you have no legal access." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "You can't." "I can," I said, meeting his eyes. "And I did. The bills you have been piling up, they are your problem now. The money from the rentals is gone. The loser you laughed at does not owe you a single dime." The waiter returned with our drinks, set them down, and left without sensing the storm at the table. Helena pushed her glass away, her hands trembling just enough for me to notice. "Dad, this is not fair," she said, her voice softer now. "Fair?" I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. "Was it fair when you forged my signature on those loan papers? When you let Sebastian talk to me like I was dirt in my own house? You have mistaken my silence for weakness. That was your mistake." Sebastian tried to recover, forcing a grin. "You think this scares me? We will bounce back." I leaned back, letting the chair creak. "Oh, I am sure you will. Just not on my back anymore." The drive home that night was quiet, the kind of quiet that seeps into your bones. The streetlights passed in intervals, each one casting the inside of the car in brief flashes of gold. I thought about the years I had spent bending so no one else had to break. I thought about the dinners where I bit my tongue, the checks I signed without question, the respect I gave without ever getting it back. And for the first time, I did not feel regret. I felt finished. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light flickered on automatically. I stood there for a moment before going inside, letting the night air wash over me. The house, my house, was still mine. The walls did not echo with anyone else's laughter or contempt, just the steady hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the old clock in the hall. I poured myself a drink, the good scotch I had been saving for no reason other than habit, and sat at the kitchen table. The envelope Sebastian had returned sat in front of me. I did not open it. I did not need to. I already knew every word, every number. People think revenge is a grand gesture, a single explosive moment. But it is not. It is a series of quiet, deliberate steps. It is patience weaponized. And the most satisfying part is not watching them fall. It is walking away knowing you will never have to carry their weight again. I raised my glass to the empty room. "To the rules," I said softly, "and knowing when to change them." Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the last of the autumn leaves. The night carried no laughter, no smirks, only the sound of my breathing, steady and free.